November the 22nd, 1963, Texas. John F. Kennedy's motorcade rolls through the streets of Dallas. Shots are heard. 30 minutes later, he is declared dead in a surgery room of a Dallas hospital. In January 1961, 22 months before the tragedy in Dallas, John F. Kennedy took the oath as the 35th President of the United States. JFK was born May 29, 1917. In 1940, he graduated with honors from Harvard University. A year later, Kennedy joined the US Navy. He commanded a torpedo boat as a lieutenant and took part in the hostilities in the Pacific during World War II. Kennedy sustained a serious back injury during a collision with a Japanese destroyer. Kennedy was awarded 2 medals for courage for rescuing his men. Since 1947, Kennedy devoted himself to politics. He was elected to the House of Representatives and later to the US Senate. After beating Richard Nixon in the presidential race, Kennedy admitted that he was most struck by the fact that things were really as bad as they had expected. Kennedy sanctioned the covert operation to topple Cuba's Fidel Castro, originally planned and approved by President Eisenhower. But he didn't save the Cuban rebel forces after the defeat, as he feared, not without reason, that it would cause the condemnation of the international community. The failed Bay of Pigs landing resulted in the cancellation of Kennedy's meeting with Nikita Khrushchev. 2 leaders wouldn't meet until June 4, 1961, in Vienna. A discord between the USSR and the US flared up over Germany. Khrushchev threatened to sign a separate treaty with the GDR and to change the status of Berlin, which at the time was only symbolically divided into western and eastern sectors. Tensions peaked and threats were made to use force. Kennedy was against a confrontation over West Berlin, but made it clear he would not hesitate to use force if Moscow attempted to unilaterally change the status quo. The construction of the Berlin Wall that was launched in August of 1961 divided the city, and for a long 30 years deprived the Germans of hope for reunification. To avoid further confrontation, Washington chose not to interfere, especially considering the fact that Khrushchev refrained from concluding a separate treaty with East Germany. Within a year, Kennedy would face the toughest challenge of his short presidency. The Caribbean crisis, which broke out in October of 1962, put the world on the brink of nuclear war. The precursor to this crisis was Khrushchev's decision to secretly deploy Soviet medium-range nuclear missiles in Cuba. When the missiles were detected by the Americans, Moscow initially tried to deny their presence in Cuba, but was soon forced to admit it had deployed the weapons on the island. Even though the missiles presented an immediate danger to the US, Kennedy preferred to take a cautious and restrained position. Most members of the US Crisis Resolution Headquarters insisted on bombarding and invading Cuba, but Kennedy opted for a military quarantine of the island by US Navy. Eventually, a settlement was reached according to which the US committed not to overthrow the Castro regime in Cuba in exchange for the withdrawal of all Soviet missiles. Thus, the world avoided a nuclear disaster. A year later, in August of 1963, at the meeting of foreign ministers in Moscow, the US, the UK and the Soviet Union signed an agreement banning nuclear tests in the atmosphere, in outer space and underwater. This treaty was largely facilitated by Kennedy's desire to break the vicious circle of the arms race. Dallas, Texas, November 22, 1963. John F. Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline went to Dallas as part of Kennedy's presidential campaign. He was seeking a second term in office, but fate decided otherwise. Kennedy's assassination shook the US and the entire world. The Warren Commission blamed the killing on Lee Harvey Oswald, who allegedly acted alone. Almost 50 years have passed since the tragedy in Dallas, but many people continue to question the findings of the commission. Various versions of events continue to be debated, but none have been confirmed. As a result, the blanks in the Warren Report are still waiting to be filled. The 35th President of the United States is buried here in Arlington Cemetery in Washington, D.C. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. John F. Kennedy.